I can't stand these damn people on television these days. If it's not sex they're talking about, it's money or some other godforsaken thing to do," Oliver said with a look of disdain on his face. "Hey, and what's wrong with talking about a little money and sex?" a man said from behind him. "Hell, if I was 40 years younger, I'd be chasing both." Laughter erupted in the television room of the assisted living home full of elderly people. But Oliver didn't laugh. He didn't see the humor in the old man's joke. He turned around and looked as stone-faced as an old statue. "God help us," he whispered, looking over at Evelyn, the elderly woman sitting next to him. She looked at him and shook her head. "If I was 40 years younger, I'd have slapped him in his mouth." "Where's Richard and Emma?" she asked. "Emma has some family visiting her today. I haven't seen Richard." Evelyn turned back and looked at the television show, with scantily clad women wearing too much makeup, spewing their list of what a man has to bring to the table to date them, while showing clips of them dancing with each other. She looked back over at Oliver. "I'll bet Emma's granddaughter came to see her today. Probably just to ask her for some more money, like always. That's the only time that girl comes to see her, and her parents couldn't be bothered. Well, at least she has someone to come and see her. I haven't seen my family in over 6 months." It had actually been 4 months, but Oliver liked to exaggerate. "Oh, Oliver, your family isn't any better. Every time they end up visiting you, you end up arguing with them." Oliver sighed and stubbornly turned away. He wasn't on good terms with his family either. "Richard better hurry up or he's going to miss this program. You know how he likes these trashy TV shows. Ah, speak of the devil, and he shall appear," the man's low-toned voice said. It was Richard. The weathered-faced man stood next to Evelyn. He spit his dip into a small white styrofoam cup and smiled. His yellow and brown stained teeth only added to his rough appearance. "What a miss," he said while sitting next to Evelyn. "Nothing much, just more of this trash you like to watch on TV," Evelyn said while rolling her eyes. Evelyn had once been a well-respected school teacher who had even gone on to become principal. But a string of health issues and old age had landed her here at Sunny Brook Retirement Home, the end of the line for people their age. Richard leaned over Evelyn to speak to Oliver. "You know, there was a time when I'd have had women like this squirming and calling me daddy. You know what I mean, Ollie boy?" He laughed and began coughing. A small amount of drool dripped from his mouth. Oliver, a more refined, polished man, did not always agree with Richard's crude humor. "You shouldn't say stuff like that. You're too old for those kinds of jokes. And you should stop chewing that tobacco. It's disgusting." Oliver had come from a well-to-do family at one time. He'd owned a small but successful business, which he eventually turned over to his 2 sons. After the death of his wife, he was in a bad car accident, leaving him with permanent damage in both his legs. Unable to get around very well, in his declining health, his son saw fit to place him in an assisted living facility. He'd been at Sunny Brook the longest. "Ah, Oliver, you're too uptight. You need to live a little," Richard said while leaning back in his seat. "You call this living?" Evelyn said, not taking her eyes off the television. Though what she had said was in jest, all 3 of them sat silently, thinking about their plot in life and what they all knew was next. Their silence spoke volumes. "Hello, my friends." The soft voice broke the silence. They looked over. It was Emma, the 4th and final member of their little group. The plump, sweet-faced woman stood there looking almost like a child. "Hey there, baby girl. How you doing today?" Richard said while standing up to offer her his seat. "Oh, you're such a gentleman," Emma said while softly patting his shoulder and sitting down. "Gentleman, Oliver scoffed. "A real gentleman always wears a sports coat or a blazer of some kind. People used to dress very nice. And I'll tell you something else." "Oh, shut up, Oliver," Evelyn said, cutting him off. Looking over at Emma, they both laughed. "How was your visit with your granddaughter?" "Well, she was late, so I didn't get that much time with her. but she's doing just fine. She's not on drugs anymore. And she's got a new job that starts next week. I am so happy for her. Evelyn looked suspicious. And what else did she say, Emma? Did she ask for anything? Emma shook her head no. No, she didn't. Emma turned and looked away. But Evelyn wasn't buying it. How much did she ask for this time? Emma looked to become blushing. Come on, Emma. How much? A couple thousand? Emma sheepishly said. A couple thousand? Evelyn said loudly. Shh, Oliver said while holding his finger to his mouth. Ladies, please. What, did you give it to her? She said she really needed it. She needs a new car. That boyfriend of hers wrecked hers. And how else is she supposed to get to work, the poor thing? Emma looked like she was about to tear up. She knew it was foolish to continue giving her family money. It was the only time they came around. But she feared if she said no, they wouldn't come around at all. It's all right, baby girl, it's all right, Richard said while placing his hand on her shoulder, comforting her. Richard was a bit of a mystery. No one really knew much about him or how he ended up at Sunny Brook. He was a veteran from Texas, but that was as much as anybody knew about him. He didn't speak much about his past, ever. He dipped his snuff and liked his whiskey, which they weren't supposed to have, but he snuck it in anyway. He had the presence of a man who had seen and been through a lot. He was their de facto leader. Don't be too hard on her. Sweet death gonna come one day and take us all to paradise. The other three looked at him. They'd heard Richard say things like this before. But there was something very comforting in the way he had said it. Medicine time, the young nurse said while coming around to distribute medicine. I hate this part of the day, Oliver said. I get sick of taking all these damn pills, and it always upsets my stomach. Oliver, if you didn't take all those pills, the pain would be so bad you wouldn't even be able to walk. Hell, you can barely walk now, Evelyn said. That may be true, but I hate it anyway. As the nurse came around to give the group their pills, Evelyn saw the young lady had no wedding ring on her finger. Honey, when are you gonna get married? You are so pretty. When I was your age, I was married and had 2 kids already. What are you waiting for? The nurse looked at Evelyn. You could tell by the look on her face, she did not find the question amusing. I'll tell you what, I'll get married when you get a visitor. Women don't have to be married to be happy these days. Things have changed, you know. She handed Emma her blood pressure pills and walked away. The group was stunned at the harsh response. Evelyn was a tough old gal, but what the nurse had said had hurt her feelings. She just took her pills and stared into the empty water cup. Emma reached over and held her hand, offering her silent support. Emma may have been the baby of the group, but there was nothing more comforting than her soft touch. She was sweet, innocent, and full of love. Her childlike way only made her more lovable. Later that night, Richard was in Oliver's room talking before bedtime. How long you been here, Oliver? Too long. I grow tired of this place. The staff here treat us like we bother them. Like we are an inconvenience to them. I don't like it. But hey, what am I going to do? Richard sighed. How in the hell did I get so old? I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror the other day. I almost didn't recognize myself. Now, I ain't never been pretty, but goddamn, man, I'm just old and broken down. They laughed a bit. Hey, you remember that guy? What was his name? That guy that used to assist people with death when they were tired of living. God, for the life of me, I can't remember his name. Kevorkian, Oliver said. That's him. That's the one. Dr. Kevorkian, Dr. Death. Sweet angel of mercy, I'd call him. I wish that guy was still around, Richard said while drifting off. Why are you always talking about death? Death, death, death. Do you want to die or something? Richard looked at him, but he didn't say anything. He just got up and walked to the door. You know, Ollie, when I consider the life I have now, it doesn't seem like such a bad option. Richard went to his room and laid on his bed, took a bottle of whiskey out from his bedside drawer, and began to drink it straight out of the bottle. He was grateful Sunny Brook allowed them to leave the campus when they were able, but he was also more grateful that there was a liquor store just a block away. The next morning, the group sat together for breakfast. Hey, why don't we all go to the park today? Richard said. I'm tired of sitting around here all day. Let's go get some fresh air. Oh, that's a wonderful idea. Let's do that, Emma joyfully said while clapping her hands. Yes, that is a good idea, Oliver said. I'll go. How about you, Evelyn? I don't know. My knee is acting up today. Oh, come on, Evelyn. The park is only a block or two away, and if I can make it on my 2 bad legs, you can make it on your 1 bad knee. Oh, all right, I'll go. But I don't want to be out there too long. It gets too hot. Hey, don't worry, Evelyn, Richard said. If it gets too hot, I'll just take off my shirt and fan you with it. Oh, please don't. Nobody wants to see that, Evelyn said. They laughed and made plans to go to the park later. While up in his room preparing to go, Oliver pulled a picture of his deceased wife out of his drawer. It was a picture of him and her in their younger years, having colorful drinks in Mexico. She looked so beautiful and happy in that picture. He was transported back to that moment in time. He could even hear the music playing and the sound of the ocean waves crashing in the background. How he missed her and longed to be with her again one day. Through his faith, he believed he would, and he couldn't wait. It made him think about what Richard had said the other day. Death could surely be your friend. He was snapped out of his daydream when Richard came and knocked on the door. Come on, old-timer, let's get going. He placed the picture back in the drawer, and they left. On their way out, Evelyn saw the nurse who had made the rude comment to her. She looked at the nurse with disdain. She was still upset about what the woman had said to her. The nurse never even paid her any mind. Richard saw Evelyn looking at the nurse and placed his hand on her shoulder. Don't you worry. One day she's going to pay for her behavior. While at the park, they sat at a table having snacks and enjoying being outside. Richard pulled a small bottle of whiskey out of his pocket. Emma began giggling. You are so bad, Richard. He held the bottle out to her. You want a sip, baby girl? No, thank you, she said, continuing to giggle. They sat there watching people, judging and criticizing. Hey, what the hell is wrong with people these days? Oliver said. Everyone on their phones all the time. Do people even enjoy just being alive these days? These young people, they bitch and complain about everything. They don't know how easy they have it these days. Everything is at their disposal. And I tell you something else. Society has created a bunch of emotional wimps. Oh, Oliver, there you go again on another one of your rants, Evelyn said. He's right. Richard spoke up after being quiet most of the time there. Well, maybe he is right. Well, what are you going to do? It's not like you can just change people, Evelyn said. Yeah, but you can change yourself, Richard said. Emma chimed in. You know, Richard, you don't say too much, but when you do, you say some weird stuff. And how come you never talk about yourself? You know everything there is to know about us, but we know very little about you. Richard looked at everyone before speaking. I'll tell you, I've done a lot of things in my life. Most of them not worth talking about. The most significant thing I've ever done was go off to war. And most of those memories, I can't handle. The one thing that ever brought me feelings of redemption was killing someone that deserved it. What are you talking about? Oliver asked. Everything I said was true. I'm at my life's end cycle, folks, and I don't like where I'm at. I have no joy. The light in my eyes is dimmed, and all I see is darkness. This crazy diamond stopped shining a long time ago. I have nothing left to offer this world, and I'm ready. I tell you this though, before I go, I'll take one more deserving life with me and have one more fleeting moment of happiness. Richard, are you serious? If you are, this isn't funny, Evelyn said. Oh, I'm quite serious, my dear. Quite serious. And what about prison? You think about just sitting in jail for the rest of your life? Richard laughed. My dear, I don't plan on going to prison. I don't plan on turning myself in. Death, sweet death. Everyone was silent. Maybe you all should think about the same thing. What? Richard, this is nonsense you're talking. You're talking crazy, Oliver said. Is it? Is it really? You all just gonna slowly rot in that home for the walking dead, taking pills every day that make you feel horrible? Just sitting there growing older and older. When's the last time someone came to visit you anyway? Looking at the same faces every day, or seeing them die off one by one, waiting and wondering when it's gonna be your turn. I'm not waiting around for death. I take my destiny into my own hands, and I'll do the world a favor by taking one asshole out with me when I go. Though shocked by what Richard was saying, the group of elderly people almost looked inspired. Evelyn was the first to speak up. Richard, I'm old. Sometimes I feel like I don't even have the energy to put on my own shoes. Even if I wanted to kill someone, I couldn't. I guess I'm just gonna die at Sunny Brook watching stupid TV shows. Richard looked at the other two. I'm surprised at you, Oliver. I thought you wanted to see your wife again. Isn't that what your religion tells you? Think about it. The single pull of a trigger, and you'd be reunited with her forever. Oliver placed his hands over his mouth and looked to become emotional. Don't bring my wife into this. Don't do that, Richard. Don't bring her up one more time. I've had enough of this talk. I think it's time we got back. On their way back out of the park, no one spoke. Richard's rant had upset the group. Upon turning around the corner on the walk path, a group of boys came running from around the trees. One of the boys bumped into Oliver and knocked him to the ground. Oliver, unable to break his fall with his hands, fell onto his knees. The impact sent excruciating pain through his legs. He moaned and grabbed at his knees. The others attempted to help him, but they couldn't get him up. He waved them off in order to give him a moment to collect himself. The boy who had knocked him over turned and laughed at the sight of the fallen old man in pain. One even took out his cell phone and began recording Oliver and the group standing there in distress. Hashtag don't get old, one of the boys yelled before turning around and running to catch up with his friends. He ended up tripping over a branch on the ground, but quickly hopped up and ran off. Are you all right, Oliver? Do we need to call someone to help you? Emma asked. No, I'm fine. I'm ready to get up now. Oh man, I'd like to kill that little bastard, Oliver said while grimacing in pain, while he was helped to his feet. He looked over at Richard, but they didn't say anything. Nothing needed to be said. Richard saw the anger in his eyes. Walking on, Oliver walked slowly and limped behind the others. He looked down at the spot where the boy had tripped over the branch and saw a small handgun lying in the brush. The boy must have dropped it when he fell, Oliver thought. He slowly bent down, grabbed the gun, looked to make sure the others weren't looking, and placed it in his waistband. You okay, Oliver? We'll wait for you, Emma said. I'm coming, Emma. I'm coming. I'm just a little sore, but I'm fine. Those damn boys are always out here messing around. No respect. I can't imagine what their parents are like. That's another reason I don't like coming out here, Evelyn said. Richard looked over at Evelyn, then at Oliver. They're gonna get what's coming to them one day. Just you wait and see. They walked on and got back to Sunny Brook. The next day, the group wasn't as talkative, and Oliver's fall had limited his mobility. What Richard had said had affected them, and it made them think about their lives. One afternoon, the group sat in the courtyard talking. "How's your knee, Oliver? You seem to be getting around a lot better," Emma said. "It's better now. I'm almost at full speed." They chatted a little while longer, then got up to go inside as it got a little chilly out. Richard, Emma, and Oliver went in, but Evelyn chose to sit outside a little while longer by herself. Not long after, the young nurse who had made the rude comment to Evelyn came out to give her her medication. "Here's your pills and your cup of water," she said, holding the items out to Evelyn. One pill slipped out of Evelyn's hand and disappeared into the grass. "Oh, I dropped one. Can you please get me another one?" The nurse turned and looked at her, smiled and said, "Well, I guess if you had a husband, he could find it for you, couldn't he?" and walked away. Evelyn wasn't hurt this time by the nurse's comment. She was angry. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe death was better than being disrespected on a daily basis. Later that night, Oliver sat on his bed looking at the picture of him and his wife in Mexico. He looked at the smile on her face. He could hear her laugh in his head. A sharp pain shot through his knee where he had fallen. He became angry about how those boys had knocked him over and mocked him, filming him in such a vulnerable state, and him not being able to do anything about it. He focused on the picture. His lips began to tremble in sorrow and anger. He dug his hands under the mattress and pulled out the gun he'd found in the park. He looked at the gun, rotated the cylinder, and saw it had bullets in it. Oliver looked at the picture again. His eyes began to water. "I'll be with you again soon, my love." He placed the gun in his waistband and left the room. Walking down the hall, he came across Richard getting some water. "Hey there, buddy, where are you off to?" "I just thought I'd take a little walk," Oliver said. Richard looked at the bulge coming from Oliver's waist and smirked. "Is that thing you found in the park the other day?" Oliver looked concerned. "Didn't think anybody saw you pick that up, did you?" "Don't worry, I ain't seen nothing. Let me tell you something. Death can be as merciful as God himself." The two shook hands and hugged. "I'll be joining you soon, buddy," Richard said. Then Oliver headed for the door. "Oh, hey, Oliver." "Make 'em know who you are." Oliver nodded. Oliver snuck out of the building without anyone seeing him and went back to the park, hoping to find those boys. He remembered Evelyn saying they were always hanging out in the park. He planned on making this their last night. Oliver made it back to the park. He began walking around and searching for the boys, but it was empty. He had actually felt a little relieved, as he had started to regret going there to do this anyway. On his way out, he smelled marijuana and heard laughing coming from the other side of the trees. Oliver walked through the trees to see who it was. It was the three boys. "Hey, you want something, old man?" one of the boys said. Oliver just stood there and didn't say anything. He just stared at them. "Hey, you want to hit this?" one of the boys said, holding the joint out to Oliver. But he refused to say anything. "Hey, get the hell out of here, old man," the one who had knocked him over said. The boys stood up and began approaching Oliver. Oliver pulled the gun out of his waistband. The boys stopped once they saw the gun. "Hey, that's my gun. Hey, you're that old dude I knocked over the other day. Hey, give me back my gun, man." Oliver raised the gun. "You have no respect. You can't treat people like this. You think you own the world." Oliver's hands were shaking. "Look, just give me the gun, old man, and we'll let you leave, okay?" Oliver didn't budge. "Give me the gun," the boy said while lunging at Oliver. Oliver fired a single shot, and the boy dropped to the ground. His two friends looked on in shock. Oliver pointed the gun at them and they ran for their lives through the trees. Oliver walked over to the boy on the ground and fired 2 more shots into him. He turned around and slowly walked towards the park's exit. His knee was hurting again, so he walked slowly through the park. Upon reaching the exit, he saw the police were standing there with the boy's 2 friends. "That's him! That's the guy that shot our friend," the boys yelled. "He's got a gun on him." The police drew their guns once they saw Oliver still had the gun in his hand. "Hey, drop it now!" the cops yelled. But Oliver just limped forward. The tears in his eyes made the flashing lights look blurry. He raised his gun and screamed, "Elizabeth!" and was shot down. Oliver closed his eyes and exhaled his last breath. His clenched hand relaxed, and the picture of him and his wife fell to the ground. The news of Oliver's death shocked the community of Sunny Brook Retirement Home. They couldn't believe Oliver had done this. The group sat in the TV room, watching the news coverage of it. Evelyn and Emma cried at the loss of their dear friend, while Richard consoled them. "It's okay, ladies. It's okay. He did what he needed to do. He gave himself purpose. He's with his wife now. Rejoice. Sweet death has embraced him." "But I'm gonna miss him so much," Emma said while wiping the tears from her eyes. "You'll see him again. Hey, and without the bad legs. It's okay, baby girl. It's okay." The 3 drew closer after that. They supported each other after Oliver's death. They needed each other. They were all each other had. One night, while on the way back to her room, Evelyn crossed paths with the young nurse. "I'm sorry to hear about your friend," the nurse said. She sounded sincere. "He was always a gentleman, but if you ask me, the wrong one of you died." She walked off and disappeared down the hall. Evelyn became very angry. She walked down the hall past her room and knocked on Richard's door. He opened it. "How do you kill somebody?" she said. Richard knew she was serious. A big smile appeared on his face. She walked in and he closed the door behind her. The next day while having lunch, Evelyn was having steak. Plastic forks and knives were always given with meal trays. She took her tray up to the counter and asked if she could borrow a real knife to cut the steak, as it was too tough to cut with a plastic knife. The person behind the counter gave her a real knife and waited for Evelyn to give it back once done. Richard came and distracted the person with a request of his own. While Richard had the attendees' full attention, Evelyn took the knife back to the table and sat it on the seat beside her. Evelyn waited for the nurse to show up, and eventually she came into the eating area. Evelyn waved her over. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I bumped my leg on the table. I think I may have hurt it. Can you please take a look?" The nurse sighed with uninterest, but looked down at Evelyn's leg anyway. Evelyn looked over at Richard, and he nodded as if giving the okay. She picked up the knife off the chair, raised it high, and plunged it into the back of the nurse's skull. The nurse screamed and grabbed the back of her head and saw blood on her hands. She began to pass out and fell to the floor. Evelyn pulled the knife out of the nurse's head, stood up and yelled, "I'm ready!" The area was filled with people screaming and running. Security personnel ran in and saw the nurse on the floor, bleeding to death, and Evelyn standing over her. 2 armed guards came in and pleaded with Evelyn to drop the knife. "Get everybody out of here!" the guards yelled to the staff. Richard hid behind the counter behind the guards, so they didn't see him. "I've done all I'm gonna do in this life. I'm ready. Shoot me." But the guards continued to plead with her and try and talk her down. The nurse on the floor began to regain consciousness and started moving and moaning. Evelyn looked down at the bloody woman, then at the guards. She raised the knife and prepared to stab the nurse one more time. "No!" the guards yelled before shooting Evelyn. She fell back onto the table and slid down to the floor. She was dead. Richard snuck up from behind the counter and crept up behind the guard and grabbed his gun out of his holster. The other guard drew down on him. "What the hell are you doing? Drop that now!" The sound of sirens began blaring from outside. "So are you gonna set me free? Or do I have to make you do it?" Richard said while smiling. All this time, Emma and the others were on the other side of the glass door watching. She prayed Richard wouldn't go through with it and just give up. "Sir, drop the gun. Look, we don't want anyone else to get hurt here today. Please just drop it. Let's talk about this." Richard looked at the guard with a serious look. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "I don't," the guard said. "Well, I'll bet you will now." Richard quickly raised the gun at the guard and was shot down. The back of Richard's head was blown out. The blood and skull fragments splattered across the glass door. Emma screamed and looked away. Richard had managed to get a shot off and struck the guard in the shoulder. That day had become known as the Sunny Brook massacre. No one could figure out what made these elderly people decide to go on such a spree of brutal violence. The cops were baffled, and Emma never told anyone about the conversation that had taken place that day at the park that changed everything. Since that day, she kept to herself mostly. She had lost her sweet, bubbly personality and had become sullen. Emma sat alone most days thinking, wondering when death, the benevolent, would one day come and take her to see her friends. Hello all, and thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you've liked this content, please click the like button, share, and subscribe to receive notifications for new dark stories. Until the next time, be good to each other. It's a scary world out there.